Okay, this is a video on a sew on fly. So here we are. We have our two sides, our left and our right front. I've just cut a partial one just to really show you the center front, which is where all the business happens. We have our fly piece to sew on, and we have our fly facing. Now I've interfaced the fly and half of the fly facing. I didn't have quite enough to interface this bit, but I cut it long anyway. So one of the things that I often do when I'm sewing for myself is I cut things a little bit too long. Like the fly shield doesn't need to be this long, but it's easier to trim it off. If you're making a pattern, obviously you'll make sure that that is all correct. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make my fly shield. So this is just a rectangular one. I'm going to fold it in half with right sides together. And I'm just going to sew across here. So basically when I flip it through, it's going to be a shield. This is not the most elegant shape, but I am going to do it anyway. So I'm just going to, you can do whatever shape you want. Sometimes it's like a diagonal one. Okay, and then I'm going to turn it through. Okay, but firstly I need to clip this and grate it neatly. Then I'm going to turn it through. And I will press that. Okay, just wanted to show you that you'll finish this edge and you'll finish this edge. This is the fly shield we just sewed, and I just want to show you kind of how it's going to go together. So the zipper will get attached to the fly shield. Then this will go behind here. Okay. The fly will get attached to this piece and it will get folded under. And then this will get sewn together, and then finally you'll do your J-stitch. So that's kind of how it's going to happen. Okay. I'm refilming this because I thought of an easier way to explain it. So anyway, my zipper that I have is just a little bit long, so I'm just going to actually end up hanging it off the top here. So I'm going to put my front pieces right side together, and I like to, so you're going to align them like this. I like to sew my fly in with just the two fronts when they're flat. However, this kind of goes against the order of assembly a little bit for trousers. So with trousers, you want to sew a left leg and a right leg separately and then put them together at the crotch seam last. This is really, really important if you want the legs of your pants to like hang together, which you do. I would say the only exception to this is things like jeans. And for those, you would sew the fronts together and the backs together and do the inseam last. That's not a big deal because it's such a bulky fabric and they're really for riding horses and stuff. So if the legs are kind of sitting apart like this, it's not really a big deal. But for the purposes of this, of trousers, you want the legs to be together. So it's very important to sew that crotch seam last. So I make that point because I'm sewing the fronts together, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a little bit open just here so I can kind of sew my legs into tubes and then finish sewing the crotch seam very last. So I'm going to start here, and then I need to see where I want my zipper to go. Now, I want to finish it here. So I'm going to just put a little pin in there, and that's where I'm going to sew that seam up until. So I'm just going to sew from here to here using whatever seam allowance I chose. Just going to match those edges a bit better. There we go. Okay, so I have this like this, and I'm going to just open it up, okay, and fold this side down. Oops, sorry, it keeps grabbing onto it. Now I'm going to place my fly right sides together on top of here. You can see I already unpicked it because I thought of a better way to explain it. I'm going to start sewing it right up against there. So I've got this folded back. This is the end of that seam that I just sewed. I'm gonna start sewing this on right up against there with everything out of the way. So just do your best. If you don't quite get it, it's not a big deal, but try not to overlap it. So you can kind of just get it into position. Okay, let's see how I did. Pretty good. It's a little bit of a gap, not a big deal. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grade some of this seam off neatly. And see what we have. We have our front piece, our other front piece, and we have our fly here. And I'm just going to tuck that back under here. Now what I want to do is I want to understitch this seam allowance to the fly, not to the trousers. So I'm just going to make sure that my seam allowances are like over. And I'm not going to start that right at the very bottom. I'm just going to start it a little bit up from where that seam ended. It's a little bit tricky to see. I didn't want to, I wanted to use a fabric that had a very clear front and back, but what that means is there's a print on it. So here we are. So then that folds back like this. So let's look at the wrong side. So it's folding back neatly like this. We've got that seam that we sewed and we have this side here. I'm just going to press this in here. And the other thing I'm going to do, no, I'll just do that. Okay, we have our fly shield and we have our zipper here. So we want to sew our zipper to the fly shield just to hold it into place. So I'm just going to use a regular foot for this. I'm just aligning the zipper tape with the edge here and I'm just going to quickly sew it in. Just holding it there. Remember that this is too long, so it's not a big deal, but if your zipper was the right length, you just lift your presser foot, open the zipper, so you can sew all the way. Okay, so we've got that prepped. Now we have our front piece ready. So you can see here's the piece with the fly shield, and here's our center front notch. So when we zip the pants up, the center front here, which is that seam that we sewed, and the center front notch here are going to match. But we need to make sure that our zipper doesn't accidentally peek out. So what I like to do is I like to fold back this seam allowance only halfway, or a smaller amount. It doesn't have to be halfway, depending on how big your seam allowance is. But in this case, I like to fold it back a 1/4 inch because I did a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so about 5 millimeters. And I'm going to press that. Okay, so I've pressed that back just a small amount there. And what that means is this side is going to overlap over that side, there, ever so slightly. Now I'm going to take my zipper on my fly shield, just peel that back, and I'm going to place it underneath here. You can see here how that's the end of my stitching, and that's where I've pressed to. So there's this kind of, you know, little bit of leeway here. So I'm just going to align the end of the zipper very close to where that stitching finished. Okay. And you're going to sew that in very close to the edge here. I've got my zipper foot on. Again, if you were using a zipper that were the correct length, you would start with it open. So I'll show you how that looks. You start with it open like this. Move that out of the way. Okay. And then a little ways down, you would lift the presser foot with the needle down, zip it up, and then sew the rest of the way down. There we go. So I have that in. So you can see now things are starting to take shape a little bit. We've got our zipper sewn there, and we've got our other side sitting over the top. You'll notice I'm not saying right and left side, and that's because you might want to sew it on the other side. So you've got this side. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin it into place. I'm going to match this notch with this notch. So that's ensuring that the center fronts are sitting on top of each other. And I'm going to pop a pin in to hold it. Okay, everything's sitting nice and flat. Always make sure things are nice and flat. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just open this side like a book. Okay, just peel that side back. And I'm going to sew the fly piece to the zipper tape only, but not the fly shield. So I'm just lifting this up. Okay, and I'm going to pop a pin into it. I'm just putting this out of the way. And I'll show you again in just a second. So that you're always making sure it's sitting nice and flat. Let me do that again. So I'm pinning this front piece over, matching the center front notches, making sure everything's sitting nice and flat. Okay, everything's got to sit really nice and smooth and flat. Popping a pin in here to hold things in place. You could even pop multiple pins down here if you like. Let's do that. Okay, making sure it's really flat. If you were a basting person, you could even baste this if you wanted to. Now at this point, I'm just peeling back just one layer, like it's a book, just to expose that fly. Okay, and I'm holding it with my fingers really carefully, just lifting up this fly layer and then grabbing the zipper tape, making sure it's always flat. And I'm going to put a pin in it. Okay, and I put another pin in it, just making sure everything's nice and flat. Like that. Let's check that it's flat. All good. Okay, and you can't, there's no pins from here. It's not coming through to the front. Okay, it's not coming through to the fly shield. So now I'm going to open this up. I'm going to pull the fly shield out of the way. And I need to sew this zipper tape to that fly piece. My pins are on the wrong side. That's okay. I'll just put some on the right side before I unpin the other side. Here's a pin. Here's another pin. Okay, then I can take these out. Again, before I sew it, I'm going to check that everything's flat. Okay, everything looks pretty good. So I'm just going to sew just my zipper tape to the fly. I'm moving the fly shield out of the way. Again, here's a time where you're going to prioritize flatness over, oh, excuse me, I sneezed, over the seam allowance. You want to make sure everything's smooth and flat, okay? So open things back out, take out these pins and see where we're at. If you make a mistake this point, it's not a big deal, okay? So let's see. Oh, it looks like a fly. So if we unzip it, we can get into the pants. So if you inadvertently sewed the fly shield to something you shouldn't have, you won't be able to get in. So check it at this point. Okay. Now it wants to kind of flap open like this, and obviously we don't want that in our pants. We want our pants to stay shut. So this is where our J-stitch comes in. Now, I recommend sewing the J-stitch from the right side because you can mark it on and make it look really nice. I always recommend marking it on with a piece of chalk or something. Let me get a ruler. There we go. When you mark your J-stitch in, you want to make sure that you're going to catch the fly, but not the fly shield. So we will pin that out of the way. But we just need to make sure that we're not like, when you're sewing it, that you're not going to not grab this bit here. So I could do a pretty small and dainty one for this one, I think. So I'm just drawing it in. Something like that, if you can see that. Okay. I'm gonna unzip because I don't want to sew it to the fly shield. So, or at least not at this point. You can do this next bit in a variety of different ways. You can do it so that then eventually when you catch the bottom, you do catch it in place, catch the fly shield. I'm going to do it separately. That's fine. So let's pin it in. This is a good time to hand baste it if you like to hand baste. Okay, so from the back you can see everything's free. This is just going to catch down on this side with the zipper tape and the fly, and this side's going to remain completely free. So if I zip it up, what that does is it prevents it from opening out like we had before. Okay, so I'm going to unzip the zip and I'm going to sew. It's customary to use a longer stitch length for the J-stitch. So a 3 is usually good, or even longer if you're doing workwear or something. So again, just making sure everything's nice and flat. Make sure that it's not kind of pulling over here and opening up that fly. Okay, see, this wants to now go underneath, so I can just fold that back out of the way. Okay, I'm folding this side out of the way, so I'm not going to catch it. And you can feel with your fingers, what are you catching? Are you catching the fly shield? No, I've got the fly shield folded out of the way neatly. At this point, you'll want to zip the fly up just to get that zipper pull out of the way. As you're turning that corner, again, just make sure everything is out of the way. Okay, that's the J-stitch. Whew, stressful. Okay, there we go. Now we have something that looks a lot like a fly. Okay, open it up. Now, the problem is, see, the fly shield's just like flapping about. It could fold back here, and we don't want that. So if we look at what happens from the back, they're very separate, aren't they? So we're just going to take these two pieces and sew across here. So I'm just going to put a pin in it. Sorry, if you can see that. Just going to sew these two pieces together. So that's just the fly and the fly shield only. We're not going to see this on the front at all. It's just going to hold these pieces together. So it doesn't really matter which side you do it from. Okay, just going to clip this little ear off here. Let's see what that did. That's better. So now we've got our sew on fly completely done. This is what it looks like from the wrong side. So we've got our fly shield, our fly, and our zipper. Oops, we've got a bit of a tension issue here, but anyway, there we go.